Their immigration is totally tied to their employment. What does that do to your willingness to report your employer for violating the law?
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
So we've got some good news for immigrants working in the United States, which is not that often that we hear good news for immigrants working in the U.S. And that is that the Department of Homeland Security last week announced, quote, a new streamlined process for immigrant workers to obtain temporary protection from deportation and work authorization if they are involved in a labor dispute. The National Immigration Law Center put out a frequently asked questions document about the new policy, which in part they outline who is eligible and how to apply. So if you're an immigrant and you reckon your employer is violating the law or your rights, and if you know anybody in this situation, then definitely listen to this, and we will and try to find some legal counsel for sure. So, who is eligible to apply for this new protection? Immigrant workers who fall within the scope of a labor agency investigation, where the labor agency has requested support for prosecutorial discretion from USCIS, I forget what the acronym stands for. Workers in that situation are eligible to request prosecutorial discretion under the new guidance. This inclusive standard is meant to address the broad chilling effect of immigration enforcement on labor standards investigations and includes workers who have not personally been subject to direct threats of retaliation. While this guidance explicitly requires support from a labor agencies from a labor agency for an individual's request for prosecutorial discretion, there may be instances where an individual is engaged in a labor dispute but has not filed a claim with a labor agency. Workers in this situation are encouraged to contact the National Immigration Law Center to strategize how best to articulate the government's labor law enforcement's interests in their case to the Department of Homeland Security. So basically, if you're an immigrant worker, you feel like the law is being violated, you feel like your rights are being violated, or you know somebody in this situation, and you're an immigrant worker, you can apply for these protections. It's not guaranteed, but you can apply for it. So what are the steps for a worker to receive this benefit? Well, in a typical case, there will be 5 steps for a worker to receive this benefit. 1, a worker becomes involved in a labor dispute that is reported to a labor agency. 2, the worker or her advocate submits a request to the labor agency for a letter supporting prosecutorial discretion, which is known as a statement of interest. 3, the labor agency agrees to support the request for prosecutorial discretion and sends a statement of interest to USCIS with a copy to the requester. 4, the worker or her advocate submits requests for deferred action or parole in place and work authorization to USCIS concurrently. And 5, if DHS approves the request, the worker receives a letter granting deferred action or parole in place for a 2-year period along with a work authorization card. So that's some good news. I mentioned up at the top that this doesn't go far enough, and of course that's always the case with things like these, because the thing that this is trying to attack is, they say, the broad chilling effect that immigrant workers in particular, and this isn't just, when people hear immigrant, they think a lot of times undocumented. They think illegal immigrants. But it's not just undocumented immigrants that face these issues, even documented immigrants, people who are here totally legally, who did things, quote unquote, the right way. There is a huge chilling effect for those workers as well. Because a lot of the people who immigrate legally, quote unquote, they are at the whim of their boss. Their immigration is totally tied to their employment. And so, let's just think through it, if I'm an immigrant worker who's here legally, I've done things the right way, I've waited in line, blah, blah, blah. If I'm in this situation and I could be deported if I lose my job, what does that do to your willingness to report your employer for violating the law, for breaking the law, for violating your rights? Well, it decreases it, right? And of course, that's obvious. It makes you less likely to challenge your boss. And so what this is meant to do, it's meant to kind of take away some of that power. But it doesn't eliminate all those concerns, because even if their ultimate removal is deferred, if their relationship with their employer is terminated, this new guidance does not provide a pathway to permanent status, right? So if this goes through and you're being protected, from during this time, well, what happens if at the end of it, your employer terminates you for a different reason, ostensibly? Or maybe your employer goes bankrupt for some reason, or they stop operating. What happens then? You no longer have that relationship with your employer and you're still deported. And so there's still going to be this chilling effect, even if it is deferred to some extent. Because the new guidance does not provide a pathway to permanent status, even if it is found that, yes, in fact, yea, verily, your boss did violate your rights. Your boss did break the law. Even if that's found, the victim in this case still does not have, it is not guaranteeing them a path to permanent status. And I'm not even talking about citizenship. I'm just talking about permanent status, that they're not going to be harassed for just existing in the country. So it's still going to create a chilling effect, obviously. The chilling effect is still going to remain to a certain extent, even if it is lessened. One of the most important things for immigrants in this situation, or if you know an immigrant in this situation, is to seek legal advice and weigh your options. So definitely, wanted to get that out there because I think it's important. I think it's good. I think it's a step in the right direction, but I think we should be doing more. We should be doing more to make immigrants' place in this country less precarious, because of course it doesn't just affect them. In the same way that prevailing wage affects the labor market in totality in an area, so does the exploitation of immigrants. If a boss is going to say, I could hire you, or I could hire this quote unquote legal immigrant and exploit them and, break the law, and they're not going to report me. Well, that is going to a certain extent, affect the labor market. And so if they are less precarious, if these immigrants feel less precarious in their status, then, that's going to make their job conditions, their working conditions better, and it'll make everything better, right? It'll make your job better too, in a roundabout way, right? And it's also, as with everything, it's the right thing to do, right? It's the right thing to do to not, dangle the lives of immigrants over their heads. You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.